In 2015, when Fallout 4 was announced at E3 live on stage, they revealed that the collector's edition would include a PIP-BOY 3000. The PIP-BOY 3000 is perhaps one of the most iconic pieces of technology in any video game ever, and the one you're seeing here is actually a Bluetooth model made by ThinkGeek in collaboration with Bethesda. Now, the special thing that sets this apart from the collector's edition is that this PIP-BOY was actually Bluetooth. It was a fully functional, working PIP-BOY. However, as you can see, fully functional might need to have an asterisk. A lot of them, including the one that I have here, were infamously defective, and they just wouldn't go past this screen, and there was another issue, and Bethesda never made a fix abundantly clear. So, what do you do when you have a dud like this, but you really want a PIP-BOY? The answer to that is you make your own. This is the PIP-BOY 2000 Mark VI. This is the model that was featured in Fallout 76 in 2018, and as abundantly clear as it is that that game was not very popular with people among launch, still, there was quite a bit of merchandise released for it, including the power armor helmet that came with its collector's edition, the nylon bag, and this model kit. Now, this is not just any standard model kit. This is my model kit, specifically one that I modified in order to make into a working PIP-BOY 2000. It's running a Raspberry Pi Compute Module 4 with a speaker, lots of rotary switches and buttons, and yes, even a working interface made by ZapWizard. And in this video, I'm going to kind of run over a little bit on how it works and the trials and the tribulations that I had to go through to get it to this point. I hope you all enjoy. And with all of that out of the way, let's set the world on fire. Hi. It's been a long time since I've done a plug for a video, so I'm gonna give it a shot again. If you like this video and what you're about to see, consider going over to Twitch or subscribing on YouTube, because every other Saturday, including this Saturday, we will be doing Fallout 76 streams. We started a couple of weeks ago, and I think it's been a lot of fun, even if there has been some growing pains with doing something that's not, Team Fortress 2. So, with all of that out of the way, enjoy the rest of the video, and enjoy me back in August of last year in the old house. So, take care. So first and foremost, I wanted to start this off by listing off some of the things that happened that led up to this point. In June, I was afflicted with a pretty bad case of pneumonia, and that in itself is kind of unusual. You don't really see a lot of pneumonia in the summer months, but I was unfortunate enough to be afflicted with it, and that made doing anything much harder because a lot of what I do is by myself. I don't really have a lot of help. So that left me kind of incapacitated for, I'm gonna say, 5 to 6 weeks. So during those 5 or 6 weeks, what did I do? That left me a lot of time to just sit there and browse my cell phone and look into things and watch videos. And one thing that I found that I really wanted was that Bluetooth PIP-BOY that I mentioned in the intro. And the Bluetooth PIP-BOY, I bought it, I got it, and it was defective. And it's not like I bought it without knowing that. I did know it was defective, but I thought maybe I could fix it. I got a little too big into my britches, and then I got it, fixed it, broke it even more, had to learn how to solder to fix it, and now it sits on the display stand, even though it is broken. And finally, that's where that whole pipe dream died. But while I was doing that, I found a lot of YouTube videos and a lot of forums that I started digging through and reading about and learning a lot about, and I finally got the motivation to make this project a reality. And there are two or three people mainly that are responsible for that. The first one that I found, and the biggest one that got me into wanting to like learn how to do this kind of stuff, was Zach Friedman. Now I've been watching him for a long time, and watching him solder things, program things, and doing all kinds of weird, wacky projects. It makes me want to make things, you know. And I don't have a 3D printer, or I had no soldering iron or wires. I mean, I don't have a bunch of parts lying around like he does, but I still wanted to make something, and a few years ago I actually started learning how to program, which never went anywhere, but I did start learning because I wanted to do that. And the reason I wanted to do that was because I did have plans a while ago to make a working Pip-Boy, and that never ultimately went anywhere. It didn't go anywhere because I couldn't find an interface that was like good to use, because I could only find Pip-Boy 3000s from like Fallout 3 interfaces made by people like Grieve and Sabis, and well, I didn't want to make that Pip-Boy. I wanted that classic green on black, and not the weird pale radiation glow type green that they used for Fallout 3. And I couldn't find anything like that that would work on the Raspberry Pi, and so that kind of died right there, because I only had a Raspberry Pi, and it was the only thing I knew how to like flash an operating system to and program for and all that jazz comfortably, to the point where I could put it in a Pip-Boy and make it work. Like I said, that didn't go anywhere. But after a few years, there was one guy who found that code, and he did something with it, and we'll get to him in just a second, don't you worry about it. But the first video I found while I was sick that got me interested in doing this was, there was a 3-part video series on making a working Pip-Boy 2000 out of this exact model kit by Your Geek Fix, specifically Jeremy over at Your Geek Fix, and they had a lot of interesting ideas. And they had the fortune of talking to Chris Bernardo, who designed this model kit, and he seems like a super swell guy, and honestly, I'm a little bit jealous, but they made a working Pip-Boy. However, their Pip-Boy was a little bit different. It was more of modifying the model kit in order to be kind of like what the Collector's Edition Pip-Boy was. Sliding a phone in there, and then using the phone to control the games, and all of that is nice and good and swell, because you were able to theme the phone, actually, to look like a Pip-Boy if you really, really wanted to, and you could have a functioning device right there, and its touchscreen, and all that jazz, and that's nice and well and good. And eventually they moved on to adding the radio module that was released for the model kit. They added buttons that do things like turn on lights, and start the fake Geiger counter and things like that, but none of that's really what I wanted. I wanted something like, you know, what I ended up making, something where if I want to go down on a menu, I move the knob down and up. I can hit the button to go to status, or the button to go to inventory, or the button to go to data, all of that. That's what I really, really wanted. And that's what I ended up with eventually, but their video was a pretty good starting point for me, because first off, it provided a lot of very interesting ideas. There was a speaker up here at one time. There's not anymore, but the button is still present as if it was. I did use the magnifying sheet trick they used in order to make it look like it's got a CRT screen from different angles. I mean, I took a lot of inspiration from them, and there was even a plan to use the holotape deck for something, which hasn't been done yet, but never say never. And that leads me to the final person I feel like I had to thank, who has seen this video, and I've bothered him more than once in the past month or so. His name is Zap Wizard. Now, Zap Wizard, ever since the game was announced and they showed the Pip-Boy, he's actually been working on making his own Pip-Boy, and he's still not done yet, but I have to imagine that's because, well, he's got a life. From what I've been able to gather, he's actually an industrial engineer, which means he's done more than I probably ever will. And he's got lots of other projects, things like the Radiation King radio, the leather working stuff he's done. I mean, the guy's got a lot of hobbies, and he's got a great career, if what I've read about him is true, and he's got a family to deal with. So, of course, all of that leads you into taking a long time with a project like this. So, no shade against him, because he's done a lot of very great work. And one of the great things he's done is that the code that I mentioned earlier, made by Grieve and Sabas and people of the like, he actually was able to take that code, modify it, and change it into working more like a Fallout 4 interface. Now, of course, obviously, the model is from Fallout 76, but the interface is still mostly the same, lacking things like map and a select button and, you know, all this other stuff. That model kit is actually lacking all of that, but that's neither here nor there. The point is, he made a very interesting program, and his program is actually set up to work with the Raspberry Pi's GPIO pins. The general purpose input-output pins, these things right here on a Raspberry Pi, they are intended for things like buttons, providing power, all that jazz, and they do a lot. In fact, on this specific project, they actually control the LEDs for to be a power LED. So when the thing is powered on, these LEDs will actually flicker and flash to show the status of the computer and all that neat stuff. But they can be used for a lot, including things like rumble and buttons, and there's just a lot that they can do if you know how to use them. And Zap Wizard's project is actually intending currently to take those GPIO and work with the buttons to do those things. I was not able to get that to work. We will get into all of that a little bit later, but for right now, all you really need to know is that he's done a lot of great work, and I've got my gripes and I've got my problems with it, but like I said, that's for later, and it may not even be entirely his fault. It could just be my ineptitude at doing this kind of thing, messing with code and all that jazz. So for now, what did I do, and how did I accomplish what I am doing here? Planning for this project was incredibly fun because when you're planning something like this, you get to look at all the things that you could buy or the things that you could do, but then you remember, well, I kind of have to ground myself because maybe I don't know how to do all of that. So the big parts list that I ended up with after looking and figuring out what I needed was, obviously a screen, buttons, knobs, dials, microcontroller, and the single board computer that I was going to be using to power it. Now, ultimately, I ended up with a Raspberry Pi Pico, Raspberry Pi CM4. I found this neat little 4x3 screen on Amazon by, I think, a company called Waveshare, and that was very, very interesting because it had HDMI, but also it had touchscreen capability. I was initially planning to put some variant of Linux or Android or something on this Pip-Boy, so that way I could actually use it with Fallout 4. And I'm not saying that it wouldn't work, but I gave up on that pretty quickly because it just didn't run well, and no matter what I did, I couldn't get it to run any better, and so the touchscreen never came in handy. But I was able to get the touchscreen working, at least for a little while. At some point, I burned it out, and it doesn't work anymore, and I might replace it one day, I might not. Finding parts that fit in this condensing this into, what took me about a month, condensing it into just a couple of minutes. I went through lots and lots and lots of buttons, and finally I was able to find these little tiny buttons that were just the right size for the side where the menu selection knob is, the item, the stat, the data, and all of that. I was able to finally find some buttons that fit in those little holes perfectly, and they just screwed right in. Unfortunately, there were some problems that I had to get around to. As you can see in the background footage here, that little piece of tape there, that's holding the side on, because in order to make those buttons fit, I actually had to snap that little side piece where the hazard stripe goes. And also, again, there's not a lot of space in this, and so wires are just kind of hanging out everywhere. They all connect to the Pico on the side there, and there's currently some progress being made in me figuring out how GPIO pins work, so that way I don't need a whole separate microcontroller to do it, but, that's for later. Also, the single board computer had to have an adapter board because the Compute Module 4 does not have HDMI or USB. And so I had to find an adapter board, which, again, I was able to finally find an adapter board that would work and that would plug into it. Now, unfortunately, the Compute Module 4 suffered some damage during the move. Good thing is, they're not too terribly expensive. Boo! Jump scare. So this next clip was a schematic mock-up that I made in Photoshop probably 6-7 months ago, and I recorded it, and it was all fresh in my mind when I made it. I went back and I watched it. I still think it holds up, and I really don't feel like making another one. And besides, I don't remember all of the parts I used at this point anyway. So, here's that. Enjoy. So this complicated mess of shit is just a quick schematic that I whipped up, that not like at any point in development. During development, the whole thing was just trial and error, tinker, figure this out, figure that out. But this was made after the fact. This is how the whole thing comes together, and I'd like to just kind of go over that real quick. So, first and foremost, the screen is the main thing that I got. It was a touchscreen. It's now not. I've already mentioned that, I'm sure. But there are a few things about it that I wanted to cover. First and foremost, the screen has a USB port, HDMI port, and an auxiliary cable port, all three of which I utilized. I used the USB in order to power it. It was powered via the pogo pins that I graciously removed, but now it's powered by a USB cable again that I had to custom make in order to make it fit. The auxiliary cable is plugged in to feed the audio from the Pi over HDMI, and then it gets fed out to the auxiliary cable, which is then fed to the speaker. Now, the speaker board is also powered via USB, which is plugged into the USB hub. And the USB hub is, of course, plugged into the Pi, and the Pi is powering all of that with this battery bank. Not to mention that the Pi is also powering the Pico, which is plugged in via, you guessed it, a USB port. Now, since we've spoken on all of that, we may as well talk about the other thing that we had to use in terms of volume and speaker and things like that. The speaker volume is controlled by a rotary switch. The rotary switch is connected to the Pico. Now, the amplifier board does have a potentiometer on it, and if I was a little more, let's say, intendant on doing it, I could have unsoldered the potentiometer and then hardwired it to this, and I thought about doing that, but that would have been complicated, and the programming was already there, and, there was just no reason to do that, so I just kept it the way it is, and the potentiometer down here in this section is what's controlling the volume. Now, the speaker gets pretty friggin' loud, but let's go ahead and talk about the other two potentiometers that I'm using, or the other one. This one is not a potentiometer. This potentiometer is the inventory, sub menu selection. When you go to inventory and you're looking at your weapons and you need to go from your 10mm to your laser musket to your grenades to your whatever, that's what this is for. It's selecting that area of the menus. And it's got a click button, but the click button no longer works. The click button on this one activates the radio. And speaking of buttons and things, these are the buttons that are in this section part of the modules. It's what I'm calling the menu module because it's got all the menu buttons and things. So we got stat, item, data, then we have a map button right around here, and then we have a select button right up here. Now, the way I had to do this was a little bit tricky. So all of these buttons, they're using different colored wires than red, but red just kind of gets the point across more easily. All the red wires are being fed to different pins on the Pico. I'll talk about that in the code section, but all these red wires, colored wires, whatever you use, they're being fed to different pins on the Pico to act as those respective buttons. Now, in order to make this all work, because the Pico only has like 3 or 4 ground pins on it that I could use, I had to find a way to make all of that work. So what I ended up having to do was solder a ground cable from this button to this button to this button, from this button. They're basically connected in parallel, so that way they all share only one ground wire. And I didn't draw the diagram of that going to the Pico, but rest assured it is going to the Pico. So that's how this is working. They all share one ground wire, and then they have their own individual separate wires going to GPIO pins on the Pico. This switch over here is a little bit different. This is not a rotary switch or a potentiometer, is I think what it's actually called. And that's for a pretty good reason. I used the PNG of the rotary switch, but it's not a rotary switch, it's just a selection switch. It's actually a 12 position switch. I had a 5 position, but I couldn't use it because it was just a little too big to fit in that top enclosure, so I ended up having to just settle for the 12 position and then not use the other 7 positions on it. And they're all connected to different GPIO pins with a ground pin going to the Pico too. Now you'll notice I didn't draw the multiple cables going from these. I just used a green to symbolize that these are multiple cables. They actually have a ground pin. They have a switch pin, which is kind of like it's kind of like the thing that controls the button. They have a clockwise and a counterclockwise pin. That's just the easiest way I can put that. And then they have a power pin. The power pin, I'm not entirely sure what it does, but they're not connected on my Pico because that would have required connecting all the switches in conjunction to run them off of the 3V, and it doesn't seem to affect anything, so I haven't worried about it. So they are there, but they're not connected. But they're connected to the switch, if that makes sense. Connected to the switch, not connected to the Pico. Now, one thing that I did add, and you don't have to do this if you don't want to, if you're thinking about undertaking a project like this, it's a very popular mod that people are doing on lots of their PIP-BOY kits, or whenever the PIP-BOY kits came out, it was a popular mod to do. I took some LEDs and I put them here where these radio tubes would normally be. I looked into using real radio tubes. Unfortunately, they just get way too hot for me to have been comfortable using. They get somewhere in the neighborhood of 300 degrees if the Google search I did was any indicator. They just get too hot, and they required, I think it's at 6 to 12 volts of power, which I simply was not going to be able to get off of the Pi. The Pi only does 5 volts, and I didn't want to fry anything or melt anything or start a fire, so I just used normal LEDs. Now, these I connected in a very weird way. They have wiring going from the red pin to the black pin. They were pre-wired with the resistors and everything, so I didn't need to worry about any of that. So one other thing that I ended up having to do was I took one of these same buttons that I used up here, and I forgot to put it in the diagram again. This right here, the power button, that does work. That's what I chose to use as the power button. To my knowledge, I could not really find anywhere that told me what was supposed to be the power button, but this just makes the most sense. It's the only one that lights up, and on mine, none of them light up. None of the buttons anywhere light up. It's only these lights, but this is the only one that lights up, so it would appear that's the one that's supposed to be the power button. But I took that and then I ran some wires from about here, and then I ran them to the Pi, and that's how I did that. And then I zip tied it to the little holotape deck thing so that the wires would stay in place a little bit, but not too tight so that way they could roam around and move. It's kind of like a cable management channel type deal. So with that said, I believe that's just about all of the explanation I could possibly add in for how the wiring and everything was done. It was a long process to figure out, a lot of trial and error, especially when I had to replace, the audio board. I replaced the speaker a couple times, then I ended up going back to the speaker I was using, and then I had to take it apart again to add the mesh that's under here, and it was a lot of work, and I still may end up changing the USB hub just because I don't like how rounded and unflat it is, but it could definitely be much flatter and allow for much more space. Even just millimeters of space is a lot in a project like this. So I figured I would run down the PIP-BOY and how it works and, everything about it. As you can see, it has been delightfully weathered up just a little bit. I gotta do some more paints of black wash on the wires, make them a little less colorful, make it look a little more in line. Maybe replace this olive drab gaffing tape that I used to restrain some of the cable holes and things like that. But just to kind of run down quickly what this whole package will entail. So when you first turn it on, give me a second, I'm working with the keyboard here. When you first turn it on, you'll probably see it boot up like this. Now this is a whole boot screen. This is just for show. It doesn't really do anything, but it's really neat to be able to turn it on and have it go through a whole boot sequence. And it's something that you can change. You can make it boot directly into the stat screen if you want, but I prefer to have, it go through the whole boot process and things like that. Just a little thing, a cosmetic thing, and speaking of cosmetic things, this screen, you may not be able to notice it on camera, but in person it's pretty noticeable. When you turn it on its side, it looks a little rounded. That's because I took some cues from your Geek Fix and I used a magnifying sheet on the screen in order to kind of, give it that rounded look. On camera, it doesn't really come off, just like how the green doesn't really come off. It looks a little wider than it's supposed to be, but that's okay. That's to be expected on some degree. Not everything is going to show up here as it does on camera, but I digress. So you'll turn the thing on typically by either turning on the power bank that's stored not so subtly behind the cuff. Probably going to figure out something to do with that. You press that power button. You can press it once to turn it on, twice to turn it off, things like that. And once it's on, you could hit this button here to turn it off. I'm not going to do that at the moment because I'm showing you what it can do. But yeah, this button kind of came loose, but unfortunately it can't really come out or go anywhere. So, kind of just adds to the feel a little bit just to have a button that's not quite in the way it's supposed to be, so that's why I just haven't taken the time to fix it. The screen, I have intentionally kept the screen clean and this clean, just because I feel like if there was anything about an electronic device like this that you would want to keep clean or fresh or whatever, it would be the screen. And, you know, the borders and things like that. It's overall just meant to look like a piece of hardware that I've been trying to take care of, and, you know, I think so far I've kind of achieved what I meant to do with that. This has not been weathered at all yet. I mean, the plate has, but the meshing right here has not been weathered. May not even do it. It's not very noticeable. Cosmetic features, again, the lights, they act as power LEDs, so you'll see that in a second when I show you the turning it off and on. These will turn off and on, mostly cosmetic, but a little bit of functionality, because when I would turn it off and then try to turn it back on, I would never tell if the button was working because there was no indicator. Now, on the actual Raspberry Pis, there is an indicator, but on this, there was no indicator because I couldn't see the Pi or anything because it's, you know, behind here. It's behind this cuff. And so I really, really needed something to be able to tell it was turning on. Lost features. Now, that's a pretty interesting thing because I did lose a few features that I wanted to keep, but then they kind of just kept adding more cosmetic look to it. Except for one, which I'll talk about in a second. There's only two that I can really think of. Bluetooth audio, lost that. There was a speaker board that I was using. It had Bluetooth audio. Unfortunately, the speaker would not reconnect on boot. I would have to manually take a mouse out, reconnect it, and that wouldn't have been such a big deal if the touchscreen was still working. It's not. The program doesn't support touchscreen functionality anyway, but at some point, that functionality just broke altogether. I tried switching USB-C cables, things like that, will not work. Another lost feature, this button, this knob, used to press in to act as a select button. That's what this is now. This is now a select button. I added that. That's not actually on the stock model. But that's what this was. This was a select button. You would press it in to select. The epoxy holding it on there, this stuff right here, at some point it just destroyed that functionality, and so it doesn't work anymore. So that's why I had to add this, because for a while I thought, well, I don't really need that because I couldn't think of anything. I couldn't remember why I had even added that functionality anyway. Turns out I need it for this menu here in order to select the holotapes and stuff. That's what you need it for. Lost functionality number 3. This button up here, this is what turned the Bluetooth speaker on. The button still works. It just doesn't do anything anymore, unfortunately. But it's nice to have a functioning button that you can press. It's kind of like a built-in fidget toy. But, you know, overall, the lost functionality is not a big deal to me, because of the things that I lost, I didn't really need them anyway, or I had workarounds for them. So with the cosmetics and the lost features out of the way, I think it's time we get on to the actual functionality of this thing. So, functionality number 1, all the buttons, they do something. There's a map button back here. Wish I could have repurposed this to be the map button. Could not. On the Fallout 76 Pip-Boy, there is no map button because in Fallout 76 you don't access the map in the Pip-Boy, you access it via an actual paper map. You pull it out and you look at it. But on here, you do not have that. So I had to add a button right behind here discreetly. You press that, turns to the map. There are 2 kinds of maps, which makes it perfect for showing off the switch up here. This is another thing that is not typically on the Fallout 76 Pip-Boy. There is an indent here, but there's normally nothing actually there. Initially, the Pico was going to go in this enclosure. Couldn't make it work, but, you know, that's neither here nor there. So if you want to switch to any of these submenus, you know, go from world map to local map, all you have to do is turn that switch. And that's probably best shown off by the inventory. There are 5 positions on this switch. And when you turn it, it goes from them one at a time, just like it would in the game. The UI itself, by the way, is fully customizable. As you can see, I did change my name. None of the numerical values or the inventory values have changed yet at all. That's something I'll work on in the future, but for now, just getting the thing functional was what I really, really wanted to do. So you can go from stat, and you can look at your special, or you can look at your perks, or things like that. Or you could go to item, and you can, you know, use the knobs to go down and up and down and what have you. Go to apparel, look at your armors, your aid, your miscellaneous, everything. It's very, very neat. It's all the functionality I wanted. If you want to listen to your holotapes, which are not working at the moment, got to figure out why. But you would select it, and normally it would show the screen here, everything, and, you know, play the audio and the what have you. It's not doing that at the moment, so I gotta figure out why. But fear not, it's not bugged. All you do is hit any button to go back to one of the other menus, and then you may have to use this to bring the holotape menu back up, but that's no big deal. The radio. I wanted to use this switch here to activate the radio. Unfortunately, there's a little too much hot glue in there to keep the KY040 rotary encoder in there. So what I ended up having to do is sacrifice this. This is now just cosmetic. I don't even know if it's in the right position. Couldn't really be helped anyway. But what I ended up having to do, if you want to access the radio, you just press the knob and it switches to the radio. So I currently have Diamond City and Appalachia radio on there, and then a bunch of the radio plays from Fallout 76. They're really nice little features, and then of course if you want to go down, you just move it down. Now of course it was too loud, so I just turned the volume knob down and bring it, and you know, if you want to turn it back up, you can do that. Now, I did want to make it look as close to the in-game Pip-Boy as possible, but I gave up on that with this because I lost the knob at some point, but if you look up images, you'll notice it's just a little too flat, and on the model kit, when I took that apart to get to the knob and see how I could make that work, there was just no way. I tried to glue it over the top of the rotary encoder with what was already there, but the rotary encoder sticks out way too far, so I ended up just having to use this knob, which I thought felt the look. It fit the look really, really well. This down here does nothing. This is just part of the this is just a part of the model kit. I ended up having to take a cue from the Prop Academy, I think it was. I looped it through there, and then I opened the module up and then just tied a knot in it so it can't come back out, because it was just coming out all the time. And then it still just sits in here, right here. All of these wires in here, they all do something except for these. Really wanted to make each of these buttons, these wires, wouldn't have really done anything aside from just cosmetic, but then I realized I couldn't make that work because these wires, they actually go into somewhere specific on here, and unless I wanted to do a bunch of trickery, I wouldn't have been able to make that work. So I gave up, kept these cosmetic, and then just eventually ran them out and into these little cable channels, which was part of my quest to figure out how I was going to make all of this work, because, well, the Pip-Boy doesn't typically have all these wires exposed on the outside, and I couldn't figure out a way to make it work any other way. I could have put them in here, but then there was no room in there. Now there is. I could probably do that a little bit later, but for now, it's the way it is. And when I got it all together, I looked at it, and it kept bothering me and bothering me and bothering me. And then finally, it kind of grew on me, because I have a friend named Amanda. She recommended these things here. And I had a bunch of these. Don't know why I didn't think about using them, but she recommended, oh, well, these will help keep it in place and things like that. And I put it on there, and I was like, well, that fits almost perfectly aesthetically with what I'm going for. It looks dirty. It looks modified. It looks cobbled together. It looks like something that you might have in the wasteland. Something that you have had for, let's say, 25 years in a vault, and you get thrown out into the wasteland, and then you have to fix it, rewire it, all that kind of stuff, and then you make some sacrifices on, well, this wire has to go out because I don't feel like running it through there and things like that, and it fit. It ultimately, it came together and it fit, and it looks definitely like something has been modified. You can also turn the volume up a little bit loud and get a kind of tinny sound that you would expect out of a speaker on something like this. There we go. And really, that's just about all the functionality I can think of. Now, we're gonna turn it off for this next part. This is something that in all the attempts of making this portion of the video I have not done, but now that it's finished and complete, for the most part, hardware-wise, I can actually do this. This may make some of you electronics people a little bit queasy. So, where did I put all of these computers and electronics and things? Behind this very flammable cuff. I used a lot of Kapton tape. This is the USB hub, HDMI cable, HDMI in, HDMI out. That's actually a mini HDMI. And it gets a little bit hot, but it's not that hot. This is the USB-C power. This is actually the compute module 4 and the nano board adapter that I ended up having to use. And it's sitting on top of the screen and like taped down in place, which it's all so compacted together that you don't really have to worry about anything going anywhere. For instance, this has not been mounted down to anything. Not this time anyway. It was previously, but it hasn't gone anywhere because there's really not a lot of room for it to squirm around. But there's nothing under this cuff except for the battery pack. And it really made for some cable management to be made much easier. For instance, this is the LED light cable. This is the rotary encoder knob for the volume and the radio, and that's all been, heat shrinked and sealed together so that way it doesn't come out very easily. And it's all very, very accessible through the cuff, which is just velcroed together. And then you can take the strap and you can unhook it, slide it through, and I think my strap may be on wrong, but I'm okay with that. There you go. And it's ready to go on the arm. So then you just slide it on, kind of loose fitting, but tight fitting enough to just be slid on there. It works really well, and I like it, and then you can just turn it on from in there, or the button if the battery pack is already on. I wish I could make it so that way you have to turn this on and then press this button, but I do not know how to do that, and I feel like that would require taking apart the battery pack, and I don't want to do that. So it just turns on, and you'll see it'll boot directly into the PIP-BOY operating system, as I've programmed it to do, which is actually a little more frustrating to do than you would think. Anyway, it'll still play all the same.
Previously on A Better Life.
And when you're done using it, you know, you just press the button.
Negative. The only reason she is in love with you is because of the bubble.
Oops. And then it turns off, and you'll see the LEDs. They'll turn off pretty soon after it goes through and does its text stuff, and then it goes off, and that's how you know it's off. And then if you want to turn it back on, you just press this button. LEDs turn on, so you know at least the button is working. It still may not come on. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes after it goes through this menu here, it'll freeze and it'll stop. Have not figured out how to get it to stop doing that, but thus far I haven't really cared that much about it. It does boot into Raspbian, and then it turns on. I could not figure out how to get it just go through the command line to do this. One neat thing about doing it this way is that if you do it this way, actually this thing does not need to be replugged in, so you can just keep using it. So the way I have it set up at the moment is it sits in the display case, the battery stays on. The PIP-BOY itself is not on, the battery is on, but I hit this button and turn it off. Because of this power button, actually, this holotape deck is kind of fucked. It will still open, it's just kind of hard to do. You open it. And then you have to lift it up and pop it out, get it out like that. So it's easier to just keep it closed, honestly. There's no like real reason to even open that part. As you can see, it's not even weathered under there, and that's something I've had to live with. It haunts me in my dreams, but it's whatever. And the whole thing works, and I really like how it came out, especially like the details on the windows and how grunged up and dirty they look, all the mud under there, because you can't really get a rag under there, and that's something I like about this rust kit that I got from Hobby Lobby, is that it gunks up and then you can dab it off to get that rust look, but if you can't get it off, it does kind of just look like mud. And so, you know, save for a few places like right here and the wires, I haven't really gotten to weathering the whole thing yet, but it's coming along, just bits and pieces, which is kind of how I like to do my weathering anyway. Initially, this is where I was going to put a whole barrage of code on top of you and talk about the microcontroller and how it worked, and all you really need to know if you're not interested in doing any of that is that the microcontroller basically shorts buttons and wires, and then the programming says, oh, well, these two pins have shorted, so do this action. Coding a microcontroller is a little bit complicated, or it can be. I used code from TouchGadget over on GitHub. It was a, simplified Raspberry Pi Pico keyboard code, basically, that I just took and modified to work with buttons and knobs rather than the traditional key switch. I really want to thank you for watching the video up until this point, but there's really nothing new I can show you, but what I can show you is a bit of an inspirational montage. You see, making something like this is not easy, as you can imagine, and especially when you're like me and you have no idea how to do any of this from the beginning. I didn't know how to solder or code or, the only thing I've ever done was, flash a Raspberry Pi with an operating system. But I figured it out and I learned it, and you can too. So I want to end this video off with this sort of clip collage of my wonderfully, shorts style video editing that I was recording just to throw at friends or whatever who were curious about the progress. But I have all of that saved, and so this is where I'm just gonna dump all those clips unedited, or at the very least minimally edited. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Go check out Zach Friedman, Your Geek Fix, Zap Wizard, all of those people who helped give me the inspiration and the surface level knowledge of just how not hard, but maybe a little bit complicated that a lot of this can be. So, thank you for watching. Enjoy the rest of the video. And with that, I'm gonna go play some Fallout, probably.